October 1942. The stone walls of Colditz'S castle absorbed sound the way a grave swallows light. I pressed my palm against the cold limestone and felt centuries of German history pushing back. 500 years this fortress had stood on its cliff above the Mulde River, and now it held men like me, men the Third Reich considered too dangerous, too clever, or too stubborn to keep anywhere else. My name is Captain Patrick Reed, Royal Army Service Corps. I'd been a prisoner for 2 years, and Colditz'S was my third camp. The Germans called it Oflag IVC, a special prison for Deutschfeindliche, enemies of Germany. What they really meant was escape artists, men who'd broken out of other camps, men who wouldn't stop trying. The courtyard was a stone well of despair, enclosed on all sides by walls that rose 7 stories high. Gothic windows stared down like dead eyes. Sentries walked the parapets with rifles slung across their shoulders, their breath visible in the autumn air. Guard towers punctuated each corner, and searchlights swept the yard every 12 seconds. I'd counted. Around me, other prisoners shuffled through morning exercise. Frenchmen clustered near the eastern wall, speaking in low voices. Poles occupied the western corner, their faces gaunt, but their eyes sharp. Dutch officers played cards on an upturned crate, and scattered throughout were my countrymen, Brits, who'd been scraped from half the camps in Germany and dumped here like dangerous chemicals too volatile to store anywhere else. The smell of the place never left you. Damp stone, coal smoke from the guards' quarters, boiled cabbage from the cookhouse. And underneath it all, something older, mildew and decay, the rot of a building that had been a mental asylum before the war. Sometimes I wondered if the walls still remembered the screams. Thinking about it again, aren't you? The voice came from beside me. Lieutenant Commander Bill Stevens, Royal Navy, stood with his hands shoved deep in his greatcoat pockets. His beard was patchy, we all looked like vagrants here, but his eyes held that particular brightness I'd come to recognize. The brightness of a man plotting. Always thinking about it? I said quietly. Bill nodded toward the main gate, where German guards checked papers for a work detail leaving the castle. They're getting sloppy. 3rd time this week they've only checked the first 3 men. And the 12th time they've changed the procedure entirely, I countered. That's the problem with this place. Just when you think you've found a pattern, they shift the rules. Colditz'S wasn't like other camps. The commandant, a Wehrmacht officer named Prowett, ran a tight operation. He knew he was housing the Reich's most persistent escapers, and he'd made the castle accordingly impregnable. Double roll calls, random searches, guard rotations every 4 hours to prevent bribery. Tunnels were nearly impossible. The castle sat on solid rock, and any digging echoed through the dungeons below. But the real genius of Colditz'S wasn't the physical security. It was psychological. The castle was so obviously escape-proof that attempting it felt like madness. The walls were too high. The guards are too numerous. The cliff is too sheer. And even if you somehow got out, you were in the heart of Germany, 400 miles from any neutral border. Yet men tried constantly. In the 18 months since I'd arrived, there had been over 40 escape attempts. None successful. The Germans caught them in tunnels, in ventilation shafts, hidden in carts, disguised as guards, even sewn into mattresses. Each failure resulted in solitary confinement, reduced rations, and a black mark that meant even harsher surveillance. I'd tried once myself. Gotten as far as the town of Colditz'S before the Gestapo picked me up at the train station, my forged papers insufficient against their scrutiny. 2 weeks in the punishment cells, the Strafzell, where the only light came from a gap under the door, and the cold seeped up through the stone floor until your bones ached. But here's what the Germans didn't understand. Every failure taught us something. Every captured tunnel revealed where the ground was weakest. Every discovered uniform told us what details to improve. We were building an encyclopedia of failure, and somewhere in those pages was the blueprint for success. "Meeting tonight," Bill murmured as a guard passed close. "Theater room. 2000 hours." I nodded without looking at him. In Colditz'S, we'd developed an entire shadow organization. escape committees for each nationality, coordinating attempts to avoid duplicating efforts. Workshop crews who crafted tools, forged documents, sewed civilian clothes from dyed blankets. Intelligence officers who mapped guard rotations and railway schedules. We were a prison, yes, but we were also a factory manufacturing escapes like other camps manufactured bootlaces. The morning bell rang a harsh clang that echoed off stone. Roll call. We formed up by nationality, standing in ragged lines while German officers walked between us with clipboards, counting heads. The sky above the courtyard was the color of dirty steel, and the first drops of rain began to fall. Hauptmann Eggers stood at the front, the security officer whose sole job was preventing escapes. He was good at it, methodical, intelligent, almost respectful in his professionalism. He studied us the way a chess master studies a board, always thinking 3 moves ahead. His eyes found mine across the courtyard. A moment of recognition. He knew I was planning something. I knew he knew. And that was the game we played. When roll call ended, we dispersed back into the castle's interior. I climbed the worn stone stairs to the British quarters on the 3rd floor. Our room held 12 bunks crammed into a space meant for 6. Personal possessions hung from nails, photographs, letters from home, a few contraband books. The window looked east toward Leipzig, where Allied bombers sometimes appeared as distant crosses in the sky. I sat on my bunk and pulled out the notebook I kept hidden in my mattress. Inside were sketches, measurements, observations. The distance from the chaplain's office window to the external wall. The blind spot in the searchlight rotation at 0300 hours. The name of the German guard who smoked during his shift and therefore paid less attention. Somewhere in this castle was a way out. A crack in the fortress, a moment of human error we could exploit. I just had to be stubborn enough to find it. The theater room sat in the castle's east wing, a drafty space with warped floorboards and a makeshift stage built from stolen lumber. The Germans allowed us theatrical productions. It kept morale up and provided a controllable outlet for energy. What they didn't know was that half our escape equipment was built in the workshop preparing props, and our planning meetings happened during rehearsals. 20 men gathered that evening, representatives from each escape committee. We sat on benches and crates, speaking in low voices while a lookout watched the door. A single oil lamp cast moving shadows on the stone walls. "Gentlemen," began Squadron Leader Brian Padden, the senior British officer. His face was all sharp angles in the lamplight. "We've had another refusal from Geneva. The Red Cross confirms Colditz'S is considered adequately supplied, which means no additional parcels for at least 2 months." Groans rippled through the room. Red Cross parcels were our lifeline: chocolate, cigarettes, tinned meat. Items we could trade, barter, or use as bribes. "Which means," Padden continued, "we need results. We need a successful escape, both for morale and to prove to the Germans that this castle isn't as impregnable as they believe." I raised my hand. "I have something." All eyes turned to me. I stood and moved to a large sheet of paper tacked to the wall, our collective map of Colditz'S, annotated with guard positions, patrol times, security measures. "The sewers," I said, tapping a section of the map. "We've dismissed them before because they're too well guarded. But I've been watching the maintenance schedule. Every 3rd Thursday, German civilians come to clear blockages. They enter through the east courtyard and spend approximately 4 hours inside the system." Bill Stevens leaned forward. And they're civilians. Not Wehrmacht, not SS, just local workers. They arrive in a truck and they leave in a truck. The guards check their papers coming in, but I've never seen them leave." Silence as the implications settled. Lieutenant Michael Sinclair, a tall Scotsman with ice-blue eyes, spoke up. "You're suggesting we hide inside their equipment?" "I'm suggesting we become them," I said. "We forge their papers, steal their overalls during the confusion of the work, and walk out the front gate when they leave." "It's been tried," someone objected. "Back at Stalag Luft 3. The Gestapo caught them immediately. This is different, I argued. At Stalag Luft, they tried to impersonate guards, military personnel subject to constant scrutiny. These are civilians. The guards barely look at them. They're beneath notice. Padden studied the map. How many could we get out? 2, maybe 3 if we're lucky. But it only takes one successful escape to prove it's possible. And once one man makes it back to England, he can provide intelligence on this place that could help liberate the rest of us. The discussion went on for another hour. Objections raised and countered. Risks assessed. Resources allocated. In the end, the committee voted to approve the plan, with one condition: I would lead it, since it was my idea, and Bill Stevens would accompany me as second. Over the following weeks, the escape factory went into production. The forgery team, led by a brilliant Canadian named Andy Moore, began crafting civilian identification papers, using photographs stolen from the commandant's office and stamps carved from shoe heels. The tailoring crew measured and sewed civilian clothes from dyed uniforms, weathering them with dirt and strategic tears to look appropriately working class. I spent my days watching the maintenance workers. They arrived at 0600 on their designated Thursdays, always the same 3 men. An older fellow with gray stubble, a middle-aged man with a pronounced limp, and a younger worker who couldn't have been more than 20. They spoke Saxon German thick accents I'd need to mimic. They carried toolboxes and wore blue overalls with the City Works insignia on the breast. The key would be timing. The workers entered the sewer access through a heavy iron door in the east courtyard. They worked for 4 hours, then emerged, filthy and exhausted. The guards, disgusted by the smell and eager to see them leave, expedited their departure. We would need to enter the sewers before them, hide in a side passage I'd identified on stolen municipal plans, wait for them to finish, and then emerge with the group. In the confusion and stench, wearing identical overalls and carrying similar tools, we might pass unnoticed long enough to board their truck. It's insane, Bill said one evening as we reviewed the plan. Brilliant, but insane. All the best plans are, I replied. The night before the attempt, I couldn't sleep. I lay in my bunk, listening to the sounds of Colditz'S at night, the distant tread of sentries on the parapets, wind whistling through cracks in the stone, the occasional cough or murmur from sleeping men. I thought about home, about England, about whether I'd see it again. At 0400, Bill and I rose silently. We dressed in our forged civilian clothes, rough trousers, worn shirts, the blue overalls over top. We tucked our forged papers into pockets. We smeared our faces and hands with dirt from the courtyard, making ourselves look like men who'd spent hours in sewers. The most difficult part was reaching the sewer entrance unseen. We timed it to coincide with the guard rotation, using a brief 60-second window when the east courtyard was unobserved. We slipped through shadows like ghosts, reached the iron door, and using a key we'd painstakingly crafted from a wax impression, unlocked it. The smell hit immediately. Sewage, rot, stagnant water. I gagged but forced myself forward. Bill followed, pulling the door shut behind us. Darkness swallowed us whole. I clicked on a small torch we'd made from a battery and wire. Its weak beam revealed brick tunnels, slick with moisture, effluent running in channels along the floor. The ceiling dripped constantly, and rats scattered at our approach. We moved deeper into the system, following the route I'd memorized from the stolen plans. Left at the first junction, straight through the barrel-vaulted section, right where the tunnel split. Finally, we reached our hiding spot, a small alcove where 2 pipes merged. We squeezed into the space, turned off the torch, and waited. The darkness was absolute. The cold seeped through our clothes. Time became meaningless, could have been minutes or hours. My heart hammered in my chest. Doubt crept in. What if the workers didn't come? What if the schedule had changed? Then, distantly, voices. The scrape of the iron door opening. Footsteps echoing down the tunnel. The German workers had arrived. The voices grew louder, bouncing off brick walls in a disorienting echo. I pressed myself deeper into the alcove, feeling Bill's shoulder against mine, both of us breathing as quietly as possible. The workers' torch beams played across the tunnel walls, sweeping past our hiding spot. My hand found the cold metal of the wrench in my pocket, part prop, part potential weapon if this went catastrophically wrong. "Scheiße, this smell never gets better," one of the workers complained in thick Saxon German, the older one with gray stubble. His torch beam stopped inches from my face, illuminating the dripping wall beside me. "Be grateful it's just sewage," replied the limping man. "Last month we had to clear a blocked drain at the hospital, found a dead dog that had been there since summer." They moved past our alcove, their conversation fading as they headed deeper into the system. I counted to 30, then risked a glance. Their lights were distant now, focused on a section of pipe where, according to the maintenance schedules, a blockage needed clearing. Bill's lips were in my ear. "How long do we wait?" "They usually work 2 to 3 hours on the main blockage," I whispered back. "Then they inspect other sections. We need to time it so we emerge just as they're finishing, not before." We waited in that cold, stinking darkness. Minutes stretched like hours. I focused on keeping my breathing steady, on not thinking about the weight of stone above us, or the fact that we were essentially trapped underground. The distant sounds of the workers provided an odd comfort, clanging tools, muffled curses, the splash of water being redirected. After what felt like an eternity, the noises changed. The workers were moving back toward the entrance, their job apparently complete. This was our moment. Bill and I emerged from the alcove, our movements careful to avoid splashing. We'd timed it perfectly, the workers were just out of sight around the bend. We fell in behind them, maintaining a 20-foot gap, our torch off to avoid drawing attention. My heart was a drum in my chest. Every step felt like it might be our last free one. The plan required split-second timing and a healthy dose of luck. We needed to emerge from the sewer entrance mixed in with the legitimate workers, filthy and exhausted enough that the guards wouldn't look too closely. The workers reached the iron door. I heard it creak open, and heard the blessed rush of fresh air mixing with the sewer's stench. Heard the guards' voices. "Done already? You're getting faster. There's efficiency, and there's wanting to get the hell out of this hole," the older worker replied. Laughter from the guards. Bill and I quickened our pace. We rounded the final corner just as the third worker, the young one, was climbing out. Perfect. We timed our arrival to look like we'd been working a different section, emerging into the gray dawn light of the east courtyard just as the legitimate workers were gathering their tools. The cold October air hit my lungs. I kept my head down, playing the role of an exhausted laborer. Beside me, Bill did the same. We moved toward the toolboxes stacked near the truck, blending into the small group of workers. "You two took your time," the older worker said to us in German. His eyes were on his toolbox, not our faces. A blessing. "Blocked pipe, near the east junction." I replied in what I hoped was passable Saxon German. "Took longer than expected," he grunted. Acknowledgement, and turned away. The guards were watching, but with expressions of disgust rather than suspicion. We stank of sewage. Who would fake that? We loaded the tools into the truck's bed, moving with the practiced efficiency of men who'd done this 100 times. The young worker gave me an odd look, a flicker of confusion, like something was off but he couldn't quite place it. My blood froze. Had he noticed we weren't part of his regular crew? "Komm schon," the guard called impatiently. "Load up and get out. You're stinking up the whole courtyard." The moment passed. The young worker shrugged and climbed into the truck's cab. The older man and the limping one followed. That left Bill and me to climb into the bed with the tools, exactly as planned. The engine coughed to life. The truck lurched forward. We were moving, through the main gate, past the guard tower, down the winding road that descended from Colditz'S castle's cliff. Every second took us farther from the stone fortress that had held me for 18 months. I watched it recede through the truck's open back, the Gothic towers, the high walls, the parapets where sentries still walked their rotations, oblivious to our escape. Bill's hand found my shoulder, squeezed once. We'd done it. We were out. The truck rumbled through the town of Colditz'S, past medieval buildings with timber frames and slate roofs. Civilians went about their morning routines, opening shops, sweeping sidewalks, cycling to work. None of them knew they were watching two escaped British prisoners of war roll past. The truck stopped at the municipal works depot on the town's edge. This was the dangerous part. The workers would clock out, change into their regular clothes, and head home. We needed to disappear before anyone noticed we weren't on the roster. As the truck parked, Bill and I jumped down and immediately walked toward the depot's rear exit, as if heading to the latrines. The workers were tired, focused on finishing their shift. No one called after us. We slipped through a gap in the fence and found ourselves on a dirt road heading south. Behind us, Colditz'S castle sat on its hill, impossibly far away already. Ahead lay 400 miles of Nazi Germany, and beyond that, freedom. We walked quickly but not frantically. Two workers heading somewhere, nothing suspicious. After 20 minutes, we veered off the road into a forested area, where we stripped off the blue overalls and stuffed them under a pile of leaves. Underneath, we wore the civilian clothes our tailors had crafted: simple trousers, jackets, flat caps. "Right," Bill said, pulling out the forged travel papers. "According to these, we're Dutch electrical workers heading to Leipzig for a repair contract. You're Willem van der Berg, I'm Klaus Hoffman." "Klaus is a German name," I pointed out. "Half German mother, Dutch father. It's all in the backstory." He grinned, the first genuine smile I'd seen from him in months. "We're free, Patrick. Actually bloody free." But I knew better than to celebrate yet. We were out of Colditz'S, yes, but we were deep in enemy territory with hundreds of miles to cover, no money, and papers that might not withstand serious scrutiny. Still, for the first time in 2 years, I could walk in a direction of my own choosing. That alone felt like a miracle. We walked for 3 days, navigating by stolen compass and railroad maps we'd memorized back in Colditz'S. The plan was to reach the Swiss border neutral territory, where we'd be interned rather than imprisoned, and from where we might eventually reach Britain. The landscape of central Germany rolled past in autumn colors. Forests of beech and oak, their leaves turning gold and rust. Small villages clustered around church spires, farmland being prepared for winter. It was beautiful in a way that seemed obscene. How could the world look so peaceful when half of Europe was burning? We avoided main roads, sticking to rural paths and woodland trails. We ate what we could: forage berries, the last of the season's apples from abandoned orchards, once a turnip we dug from a field. The hunger was constant, gnawing, familiar. In Colditz'S we'd been hungry too, but this was different. This was the hunger of freedom. On the second night, we sheltered in a barn outside a village whose name I never learned. The hay smelled sweet and dry. Rain drummed on the roof. Bill and I lay in the darkness, too keyed up to sleep despite our exhaustion. "Do you think they've noticed we're gone?" Bill asked. "Oh, they've noticed. Eggers probably turned the castle upside down, looking for the escape route. The commandant's likely furious." I felt a grim satisfaction at the thought. "But they won't find the route." By the time we emerged from the sewers, the workers had already closed and locked the access door, and we were careful not to leave any traces. "Do you think anyone else will try it?" "Not the same way. We've burned that route. Now. But something else. There's always something else." The rain continued. Somewhere a dog barked. I thought about England: green hills, gray skies, the particular smell of a London street after rain. I thought about my family, who by now had probably received the telegram. Missing in action, presumed captured. What would they think when I walked through the door? On the third day, we made a mistake. We'd been walking since dawn, and hunger was making us careless. We approached a village around midday, and instead of skirting it as we should have, we decided to risk entering. There was a bakery we could smell the bread from a quarter-mile away, and the temptation overwhelmed caution. The village was small, maybe 30 buildings clustered around a square. A few civilians moved about. An old woman carried a basket. Two men in work clothes talked outside what looked like a tavern. Normal. Safe. We approached the bakery with our forged ration coupons ready. The plan was to purchase bread like any normal travelers, then leave immediately. But as we entered, I saw the portrait on the wall, Hitler in his uniform, that penetrating stare every shop was required to display, and beside it, a poster I hadn't seen before. Our photographs, mine and Bill's, grainy but recognizable. The description listed our heights, features, and last known location, Colditz'S Castle. Reward offered for information leading to capture. The woman behind the counter looked up. Her eyes moved from us to the poster, back to us. The calculation happened in seconds, the slight widening of her eyes, the way her hand moved towards something beneath the counter. "Run!" I said quietly to Bill. We bolted. Out the door, across the square. Shouts erupted behind us. The two men outside the tavern looked up, surprised. One of them, faster than he looked, lunged for Bill. They went down in a tangle of limbs. I grabbed a brick from a crumbling wall and hurled it at the man's head, not to hurt, just to stun. It connected with his shoulder. He yelped and released Bill. We ran, through the village, into a field beyond. Behind us, more shouts. A whistle, the police, or military, or someone official summoning help. We crashed through a hedge into woodland, branches tearing at our clothes. For 20 minutes we ran, lungs burning, muscles screaming. Finally, when the sounds of pursuit had faded, we collapsed against a fallen log, gasping like landed fish. "They know," Bill panted. "They bloody know we're out." I nodded, unable to speak yet. The escape was compromised. Every police station between here and the border would have our descriptions now. Our forged papers would be scrutinized more carefully. The net was tightening. "We need to split up," I said when I could breathe again. "Two targets are easier to spot than one. We'll each make for the border separately." Bill looked like he wanted to argue but knew I was right. We divided what little food we had. We synchronized our stolen watches. We agreed to aim for a specific crossing point near Basel, where the Swiss border followed the Rhine and the terrain offered cover. "If one of us makes it," Bill said, "tell them about Colditz'S. Tell them what the Germans are doing. Make sure it wasn't for nothing." We shook hands, and then Bill disappeared into the forest heading southwest. I watched him go, then turned southeast, taking a different route toward the same destination. I walked alone for 2 more days. The isolation was crushing after months of constant companionship in Colditz'S. Every sound was a potential threat. Every person I spotted on the horizon could be the one to turn me in. I survived on rainwater, and wild mushrooms I prayed weren't poisonous. My civilian clothes were torn and filthy. I looked like a vagrant, which, in a sense, I was. On the 5th night, I reached the border region. The Swiss border ran along the Rhine River here, a natural barrier. The German side was heavily patrolled guard. Towers, spotlights, fences. But there were gaps. There had to be gaps. I waited in a copse of trees, watching the patrol patterns. Searchlights swept the riverbank every 90 seconds. Guards walked the fence line in pairs. But between 0200 and 0300 there was a slight lapse, a shift change that created a 3-minute window when the eastern section was less observed. I would have to cross the river, swim in near freezing water, through current, in darkness. The Swiss side had patrols too, but they would intern me, not shoot me. At 0200, I moved. Crouching low, I descended the embankment. The river gleamed like black glass. I waded in slowly, trying not to splash. The cold hit like a physical blow, crushing my chest. I pushed off the bottom and started swimming. The current was stronger than expected. It pulled me downstream, away from my intended crossing point. I fought it, arms and legs working mechanically, body going numb. The far bank seemed impossibly distant. Behind me, a searchlight swept close. If it caught me in the water, I was dead. My feet touched the bottom, Swiss bottom. I dragged myself onto the far bank, collapsing in the mud. Above me, stars wheeled in the October sky. I'd made it. The Swiss guards found me at dawn, hypothermic and barely conscious. They wrapped me in blankets, gave me hot coffee, and transported me to an internment camp near Bern. It wasn't freedom, not technically, but it was safety. The war couldn't touch me here. Bill Stevens never made it. I learned later he'd been caught near Stuttgart, betrayed by a suspicious railway clerk. They sent him back to Colditz'S, where he spent 2 weeks in the punishment cells before being reassigned to the same quarters he'd escaped from. I spent 5 months in Swiss internment, recovering my strength and working with British intelligence officers who debriefed me extensively about Colditz'S, its layout, security measures, the names of guards and commandants. The information would prove valuable in the war's final years. In March of 1943, I was repatriated to Britain as part of a prisoner exchange. I stepped off a transport ship at Portsmouth to gray skies and rain that felt like a blessing. England, home. They debriefed me again in London. Rooms full of military intelligence officers who wanted to know everything about German prison camps. I told them about Colditz'S, the stone fortress that had held 500 of the Allies' most determined escapers. I told them about the men still there, still planning, still refusing to give up. "And you," one officer asked, reviewing my file, "would you go back, if we asked you to?" I looked at him for a long moment. Thought about those stone walls, the cold, the hunger, the endless chess game against captors who were intelligent and disciplined. Thought about the men still there, British, French, Polish, Dutch, all united by a shared stubborn refusal to accept imprisonment. "In a heartbeat," I said, "but not as a prisoner." They smiled at that. And 6 months later, I was part of the advance team that liberated Colditz'S in April of 1945. We rolled through that gate in Sherman tanks, and I watched the prisoners gaunt, defiant, unbroken pour out into the courtyard. Some had been there since 1940, 5 years in that stone fortress. I found the sewer entrance in the east courtyard, still there, still locked. I stood looking at it while former prisoners celebrated around me. That iron door had been my path to freedom. How many others had studied it, measured it, planned around it, but never quite found the timing we had. Hauptmann Eggers was there too, standing apart from the chaos, watching his prison dissolve. I walked over to him. He looked older, more tired. "Captain Reed," he said, recognizing me immediately. "I wondered if you'd made it." "The sewer entrance, yes. We figured it out eventually. Too late to catch you, of course. You ran a good prison, Hauptmann, but not good enough." He almost smiled. "Good enough for most, but you were always stubborn. The most stubborn prisoner in Colditz'S." I agreed. He extended his hand. I shook it. There was respect in that gesture, the respect of two players at the end of a long game. He'd been the hunter, I'd been the prey, and somehow I'd survived. The war ended 3 weeks later. The fortress of Colditz'S became a footnote in history, a curiosity, the castle that held the men who wouldn't stop escaping. Some of them tried over 40 times. Many died in the attempt. A few, like me, made it. But here's what I learned in that cold stone fortress. Freedom isn't something given, it's something taken. Every time they counted us at roll call, every time they locked the cell doors at night, every time they told us escape was impossible, we were choosing. We could accept our imprisonment, or we could resist it. Most people would call it stubbornness. I call it refusal. Refusal to accept that stone walls and armed guards define the limits of human possibility. Because the truth is, the only prison that's truly inescapable is the one we build in our own minds. Colditz'S taught me that. Not through its walls, but through the men who wouldn't stop trying to get past them.